Given its convenient mid-Atlantic location and rich legacy as a manufacturing state, North Carolina is a prime maker and mover of a long list of products destined for industrial buyers and consumer markets. Supporting diverse industries from consumer foods and transportation equipment to construction materials and pharmaceuticals, North Carolina's supply chain economy accounted for more than 1.2 million jobs in the state as of 2016, according to a study by North Carolina State University. That year, supply chains contributed to over $150 billion to gross domestic product and generated more than $32 billion in state and federal revenues. What are the assets that comprise this job and revenue generator, and how can North Carolina economic developers promote them in their communities? Good morning, everyone. I'm Brittany Brady, President and CEO of the Henderson County Partnership for Economic Development and a member of NCEDA's Board of Directors. It's my honor to welcome you to this first installment of our three-part webinar series on North Carolina's supply chain. I'll also moderate today's discussion. Before we go to that, I want to thank some key organizations for their support of our professional development program. We are grateful for the North Carolina State Port Authority as our presenting sponsor for this supply chain series. Our ports provide an integral and invaluable link between North Carolina communities and the global marketplace, and their leadership is very much appreciated. NCEDA's annual sponsors also get a shout out. And Emily is now scrolling through the names and logos of this growing list of generous supporters across your screen. Annual sponsors keep NCEDA and its mission vibrant and visible year-round. And we're grateful for their important role in ensuring the readiness of North Carolina's economic development workforce. Our sincere thanks goes out to all of these organizations. Since June 2019, Aaron Brott has been the Senior Director of Key Clients and Trade Development at the North Carolina State Ports Authority. An active NCEDA member, Aaron has accumulated 25 years of diversified management experience in logistics and supply chain industry. I will now turn the webinar over to Aaron to say a few words about the Ports Authority and then introduce today's expert presenter. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Brott.
Thank you, Brittany. North Carolina Port's mission is to support and grow the commerce of North Carolina. We directly and indirectly impact over 87,000 jobs throughout the state with an economic contribution of $15.4 billion. NC Ports is comprised of two deepwater ports, one in Morehead City, which handles bulk and break bulk cargo, one in Wilmington, which handles bulk, break bulk, and containerized cargo, and an inland port in Charlotte that's connected to Wilmington via an on-dock overnight rail service. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dana Magliola, Freight and Logistics Program Manager with the North Carolina Department of Transportation Rail Division. Connecting industry and commerce to infrastructure investment, the Office of Logistics and Freight is active across the spectrum of North Carolina Department of Transportation project delivery from planning to construction. Dana joined the Department of Transportation in 2018 from North Carolina State University, where he led the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative at Poole College of Management and was the supply chain management subject matter expert for North Carolina State's Industrial Extension Service. He is the primary author on the Foundational Supply Chain Sector Economic Impact Analysis, North Carolina Supply Chain, Conduit for Commerce. Good morning, Dana.
Good morning, Aaron. Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you to NCEDA and North Carolina Ports and everyone for hosting today and for having me to present. Thank you, Brittany, as well for that introduction. I'm going to pull up our share screen, and we're going to jump right into today's program. So bear with me. Let me get this on board. All right, we should be good. Again, thanks for having me today. It's a part of my mission and role at NCDOT to educate our agency on how the supply chain applies to transportation, but I'm also a firm believer that transportation is one of the most powerful drivers of economic development. So I'm especially excited to have this opportunity to be with you today and support NCEDA as you grow efforts to recruit and grow businesses here in industry in North Carolina. As Aaron mentioned, I'm Dana Magliola, and I'm the Freight and Logistics Program Manager here, as well as work as our supply chain subject matter expert. My background is in maritime and freight forwarding, applied supply chain and operations research as well. I like that photo that Aaron had of me because that's probably one of my favorite places I've been. That's at the top of the new cranes at the Port of Wilmington. At one point, I learned one of my supervisors or superiors at DOT is afraid of heights as we got to the top of that, and they didn't want to go any further. And I realized I wasn't, so I enjoyed the adventure. Today, as Aaron mentioned, I work to really align all that we do at DOT with industrial, commercial, and economic realities in the communities we serve, and those economic realities that you help to shape and that you understand best. So I'd like today to be a learning experience as well as an environment where you and I will engage, talk about the things that most interest you. So please feel free, put questions in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that. And I know we have moderators that are also going to help. And then we'll have time at the end to have some questions. Let's start with a quick overview of our objectives for today and to our next two sessions of the part of this three-part series. The first objective I have is to help strengthen the supply chain expertise, which I'm confident you already have a foundation for today. The success of our state speaks for itself, and the outstanding track record we have in economic development really shows that you're already equipped for success. But today we're going to deepen that knowledge and that familiarity with the supply chain. We're going to prepare you to put those skills into the mix while recruiting and growing companies. Knowing more about the challenges and opportunities companies face with their supply chain will make you not only a better business recruiter, but that trusted advisor that companies are looking for, that partner in building success here in North Carolina. So today and over the next two sessions, we'll dive into key supply chain concepts, best practices, as well as discuss some of the major issues facing this broadly defined sector today. Much of this is changing in the supply chain, and it's really an exciting time to be a part of it. So we'll look at what's driving that change, and we'll take a glimpse of where it might go tomorrow. So today we'll attempt to tackle four things as we start our dive into the supply chain. The supply chain, something that was a strange concept that my mother always asked me, what exactly do you do? And now, compliments of COVID, she and everyone else now knows about the supply chain. I joke that I'm chipping away at her disappointment that I didn't become a lawyer, and this helps. So if we look at the supply chain, we'll define it, and we'll really see what a supply chain looks like today. We'll look at how it then connects to your world, to the world of economic development. We're going to talk about some big numbers on economic impact, and we'll work on how to articulate just how important the supply chain is to North Carolina's economy. And lastly, we'll jump into buzzwords, which are plentiful in supply chain. However, I think you'll learn a little bit more today about how to talk about supply chain beyond that. So as we look to define the supply chain, it helps to differentiate it from the broader economy. We all enjoy the fruits of a productive and efficient supply chain in our daily lives, where products we buy, they help improve our quality of life, they deepen and enrich our experiences as an end user, as that customer. The key thing I want us to think about today, however, is that what happens before that end user, the customer, and then focus on the different steps in which value is created throughout the supply chain. You'll often hear it called a value chain. I also want us to recognize that North Carolina's supply chain may be different than other states. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity. Both of these cases, however, knowing more about that will really prepare you to put our best foot forward as a state. So first, let's take the most basic definition of supply chain as the process by which information, goods, materials, products, or services create value. Creating this value is multifaceted, and in its most basic form, it's the flow of information, goods, and funds along a process. But if you look at this simple graphic, you'll see some of the steps along the way we'll get deeper into. You'll learn that the movement of funds and the return of that investment in value creation, and perhaps the most important flow in the supply chain, information. And this is especially true today as we look at more of our economy growing and developing around applied technology and innovation. So that's a simple definition of the supply chain, the flow of information, goods, and funds creating value. But the supply chain in actuality can be far more complex. From the basic diagram, we see the journey from raw materials through manufacturing and into the retail space with consumers. But very little in business or life is this simple, and supply chains can be very complex, as you see on the bottom. If that's what a supply chain might look like, Here's a quick overview of some of the key activities which are happening in that supply chain, ranging from procurement, where you'll see companies acquire raw materials, identify how much of those they may need, find and collaborate with vendors and supply chain partners as a company's supply chain moves then into production. Production, much like supply chain, can be simple manufacturing and assembly, but with development and innovation, sophistication of production activities, this is creating more and more value efficiently and profitably. And then enters the customer and the full ecosystem that brings valuable products to that end user. We'll hear more about these steps in depth in session 2. So I want to take us beyond the definition of a supply chain and let's look at some actual supply chains to help illustrate this concept. So I apologize if this slide awakens any nostalgia or is a trigger for those of us who survived the BlackBerry. But let's stay on top of this theme and move into the modern era of the smartphone. This illustration shows the process by which tungsten, a rare earth mineral, second only to diamonds in hardness and melting point, becomes a part of a smartphone. Tungsten mined in Rwanda, the journey begins there. On its journey to that vibrating phone in your pocket, it goes all the way across the globe. From Africa to Europe to Asia, and in this case, back to Europe, along seeing this material combined with other components and creating that value of a smartphone. I especially like this example because it brings up 2 discussion points we'll talk about. The first is the importance of provenance, of making sure that the raw materials or intermediary components that are mined or acquired or otherwise manufactured are done so ethically. And it also highlights, this is a really interesting concept, this is the B Corporation, which is a company that defines its success beyond financial profit. In an area where North Carolina is a leader in B Corporation thought leadership and longevity. Clothing is another product, the global supply chain. I'm sure this is no surprise. But I'll take you through the production of this men's thermoball eco hoodie from North Face. And I promise BF Industries did not plug this, but it is close to home as Greensboro's own. Let's start this journey with an overview of a truly global supply chain, which supports the manufacture of this product. And really, let's focus more on the area with the most activity, Asia. I'm going to zoom in right here. So here we see a broad range of suppliers and components that are in this jacket, ranging from the Korean Peninsula down to the Indian subcontinent and into Southeast Asia. For our next focus area, we're going to drill down further into the Dongguan in the Pearl River Valley. I probably mispronounced that, but we're going to get real close here. So as we see, we're getting closer and closer to a regional cluster of material suppliers and these various supply chain flows between them. This area of China is especially productive, and a significant percentage of products consumed by Americans, they see some part of their supply chain pass very close through here. In this case, the jacket is in process, moves from China further south to Vietnam and into Southeast Asia. And here we capture the final stage of the supply chain for our eco hoodie. From Vietnam, the jacket and 1,000 others like it will find their way into an ocean shipping container, a little desktop shipping container, and it's going to depart probably the port of Haiphong, bound for the United States. At the end of this 20 to 22-day journey, the eco hoodie is going to enter the port of Los Angeles, where it'll then enter the American retail market. There's a great shot here. So the eco hoodie, like so many other products manufactured in China, arrives at the port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, Tacoma, Oakland, or Vancouver. Or, and we're seeing this more and more now, they carry on to the US East Coast via the Panama Canal. In this picture, you'll see a world-class facility at Pier 400. And I love this picture. When in my previous life, I was lucky enough to be involved with the development of this port facility, one of America's most technologically advanced. That's not necessarily the end of the line, however, for our North Face jacket, as transportation and distribution activities happening domestically are important steps in this supply chain, and they bring products like this to the consumer. This is a great illustration of the scale and scope of a global supply chain. Now, if we had a shot of Pier 400 today, it would look a lot more like this because we're seeing a ton of congestion off the West Coast. And that is a disadvantage for the West Coast and a great opportunity for us on the East Coast. And I'm sure Aaron and we could talk about that for hours, but we'll keep moving. So now that we know what it is, And why? Let's see why it's important. Let's look at the economic impact of the supply chain in North Carolina and get a grasp on really how robust and healthy the supply chain in our state really is. So here are the 14 broad industrial sectors that make up the supply chain for this particular analysis. They should be familiar. You'll see modern cutting edge industry, you'll see legacy industry, sort of all together in the mix. And here's a breakdown of the economic impact of these 14 sectors. This highlights a significant contribution, especially if you look at labor income, value add or state contribution to GDP, total productivity, and then very popular at the legislature, the stat of tax contribution. So we're talking about employment-wise, nearly 480,000 North Carolinians directly involved and employed in the supply chain. And if we look at the indirect and induced employment spurred on by supply chain activity, we're talking about more than 1.2 million jobs across our state. So this is no small, I would say, multi-sector industry here. So what does a jobs impact really look like? Beyond what you might assume is frontline on supply chain, like manufacturing or. This illustration shows a little bit where some of those jobs are created. So you see from wholesale trade to real estate to food service and healthcare, these supply chain activities spur further employment in those communities. So the supply chain is relevant to every one of North Carolina's 100 counties. So many people that work in this sector do so with higher wages than on average than across the state. That said, there is a disparity between industries with wage averages driven up by technology-heavy sectors like computer manufacturing, pharma, biotech, or electronics, and then some of sort of the less technologically heavy sectors that bring that average down. But generally, supply chain wages are strong and growing, and in fact, aggressively now as labor becomes a hot commodity. So let's move beyond what a supply chain is and what it looks like. And let me tell you, I guess I don't have to tell you this. This is probably the most important things in real estate and probably economic development as well, but location, location, location. And for North Carolina, I'm sure this is a part of, one of the first things we talk about when we talk about growing or bringing companies to North Carolina. It's an outstanding position by location. It's in the middle of the most populous half of the country on the East Coast, in the fastest growing region in the United States. And beyond location, there are just so many factors that make North Carolina the place to be. I deal a lot with conversations about freight and logistics in the context of transportation. We often say that freight is the physical manifestation of economic activity. And this is especially true of supply chain activity. Transportation and infrastructure makes market access possible, both inside North Carolina and beyond our borders. The efficient, safe, and reliable movement of transportation of freight, material, components, or works in progress throughout the supply chain is especially important to developing and sustaining a commercial and industrial ecosystem. You'll hear me talk a lot about an ecosystem in the discussion around supply chain. As you talk with companies looking to relocate in North Carolina or companies looking to grow here, it's important to recognize that their suppliers are an important factor in their success. Affordable, efficient, and timely service from supply chain partners is a major priority for manufacturers. When we're able to grow a supplier base for an OEM manufacturer, we're directly contributing to improving efficiency, resiliency, and the sustainability of their supply chain in North Carolina. And we reduce their total cost of ownership, which allows them to invest more in North Carolina. Reinvest that working capital, which we'll talk so much about in a future session. This ecosystem-oriented view of supplier development, it pays dividends for regional and local economies. And I love this quote from NIST Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership here that really hits that nail on the head. And another important concept that we see out of this supplier development is that a well-developed regional supplier base provides predictability. And so many supply chain professionals will tell you that it's not about speed, it's about predictability. So if we look at economic developments, the way that industry would look at setting up its supply chain, this cluster or industry vertical approach fits very nicely. If we take aerospace, for example, where the concentration of firms in North Carolina is a competitive advantage. I think we have over 450 firms operating in North Carolina in aerospace. That finished product manufacturer, OEM, is going to look to this place as a base of operations, and that's something that will grow. Knowing that concentration of key sectors within the state is also helpful when you're out there talking to potential recruits or you're looking to grow a current business's supply base. One of the great resources that we have, and I'll introduce you to some resources right now, but the database developed by NCDOT Aviation and NC State's ITRI, Institute of Transportation Research and Education, has some great details and information on the aerospace sector. So if that's something you're working on right now, know that those resources are out there. There are some other supply chain ecosystems, and I'll highlight a few here in particular, as well, again, as some of the resources which I believe are helpful to understand and support these sectors. So as you talk to companies, one of the best ways to show them that North Carolina is the right place to call home is to show them how much of the supply chain is already at home in North Carolina, who's active and vibrant right here. Agriculture is not just a legacy sector for North Carolina, but today remains and continues to be a growth area for our state economy. Innovation in the development of agricultural products, the expanding variety of value-added agriculture, and the growing global demand for North Carolina quality produce and proteins continues to support this growth. This online database developed by NC State's Center for Environmental Farming Systems is just one of the many resources that help you identify elements of the food product supply chain. An online database that is searchable, filterable, and has a lot of information. I'll make sure that I share these links and things with you afterwards, so you have some stuff to put right in your toolkit from today. Another outstanding resource is manufactured in NC, and this database developed and maintained by the Manufacturing Extension Partnership in North Carolina is outstanding. A statewide database of active companies and suppliers organized by industry or NAICS code. So I pulled up this little map and I put myself in the position of an economic developer recruiting a consumer products manufacturing company. This company is going to need suppliers to sustain and grow their business. Local and regional suppliers offer that great benefit in cost, reliability, and efficiency. The consumer products company here is going to need suppliers from packaging, labeling, manufacturing, machinery manufacturing. So what I've done here is filtered this database, and I've found an area which I think would fit the supply chain needs of this company right along the I-85 corridor. And as you look and you say, okay, this is the sweet spot of where we should look to relocate or where we should look to grow. But if you take the reverse approach here, you get to know your region better, and you can know how to position your supplier strength and concentration as a draw in your recruiting. Here's one that I'm sure many of you have seen lately, and it's a very strong focus area for our governor, our agency, many of the agencies across the state, statewide economic development, regional development. This is truly relevant to every corner of our state, and that's the growing industry around renewable energy and wind power. This mapping database resource from Southeastern Wind Coalition does an excellent job of highlighting relevant suppliers and companies across the state that are capable of supporting this growing sector. There's also an outstanding report that was recently completed by the North Carolina Department of Commerce and BVG Associates that dives very deep into this wind power opportunity for North Carolina, upwards of $100 million market opportunity for supply chain development in our state. So please tune into this, and I'm sure that we will be able to get you a link to this report on the Commerce's website. Another resource that really helps understand the movement of freight is really looking where the commodities are moving. And by using the supply chain tool that was developed during the state freight plan here at NCDOT, this NC Freight Flow tool gives you an interactive Tableau-based tool, allowing you to drill down into each of North Carolina's 100 counties. What does that supply chain look like by commodity, by mode, directionally, and really half a dozen other ways to slice it. So this is a great resource that I use pretty regularly in my research. And then as we articulate that, that supply chain advantage, that competitive advantage for North Carolina, this isn't really a supply chain thing, but the market access that we can articulate here as a competitive advantage. And I really love to use isochrones for travel distance maps to show the benefit of a location. So I apologize if this is something you're already doing, but I believe it's a very powerful argument. And in this case, what we're working here is to position North Carolina Global Transpark in Kinston as a potential aviation hub for an international e-commerce company. So some of the work we were doing was looking at how do we say what's the market reach from this spot? And it's powerful to be able to show just how many marketplaces and potential consumers are within reach. And I really find that these isochrones, that's a fancy word, but I think they're more compelling than those big circles you see in proposals. This really talks about operationally. And when you're talking to serious folks in operations, they want to know more than just a big squishy circle. We chatted a little bit about this before we got on the call today, and that is the support ecosystem for economic development in North Carolina, and really one of the most, if not the most important factors, and that is the human factor. So understanding that just like a supplier cluster, talent is a resource that supports supply chain growth and development. And it becomes even more important as the supply chain itself becomes more sophisticated, as technology becomes ubiquitous across this sector. North Carolina is in a great position as a supplier of great talent for businesses. We talk about these resources right here with educational resources and workforce development. And another thing to think about is the amount of people coming out of US military installations and retiring in North Carolina from the military, active and ready to contribute so much of what they learned in the military to our workforce. North Carolina is also a great state for supply chain development because we have the assets. Arby's has the meat, we've got the meat here as well when it comes to supply chain assets and infrastructure. There are key logistics assets across North Carolina, from our outstanding highway network, 2 active Class 1 railroads serving the state, and major investments in intermodal rail operations such as the new CSX Carolina Connector. These Class 1 railroads operate in tandem with more than 25 short-line railways across the state, which they themselves operate as a conduit, the larger national rail network. With more than 70 commercial and general aviation airports across the state, they offer the vital capabilities of air freight. This is an important asset for just-in-time manufacturing, for companies looking to have a lean operation and keep inventory low. It's also a last-minute emergency outlet, and one that we saw used extensively during the early days of the pandemic for PPE. But it's expensive, but it's one that we have to have the infrastructure for. And as a maritime guy, I mentioned that's where I started. I'd be remiss to not only highlight just the outstanding capabilities of North Carolina ports, both container shipping, bulk and break bulk at Wilmington, or bulk and break bulk up at the Port of Morehead City. Wilmington is one of the fastest growing, most efficient and cost-effective ports in the United States. The aggressive capital investment and pro-development strategy that we're seeing from North Carolina ports really highlights the future, a bright future for North Carolina's supply chain broadly. The investment that they're making in cold chain facilities, temperature-controlled facilities, positions our state as a leader in what is becoming a very high demand, temperature-controlled supply chain. That's relevant to everything from groceries, which so many of us now order online, to fresh flowers, to life-saving vaccines and medicine. You take the inland port in Charlotte, for example, and other intermodal facilities across the state, and that really rounds out those supply chain assets serving North Carolina. We'll spend more on North Carolina's supply chain assets in session 3, so stay tuned for that conversation. But really know they're in there, and that's important to keep in your pocket. So I've been accused of a fast presenter. I hope everybody's doing all right. I see one question in the chat. The wages were from 2015 data. The good news about that, Dr. Rosen, is we are revisiting the economic impact analysis here in the coming year as a part of NCDOT's research and development portfolio. So hope to have some new numbers on that, and I think we'll see some really interesting impact from what happened in 2020 and continues to edge into 21. All right, so this is kind of where it gets fun, and I think we like to laugh at ourselves a little bit in supply chain, but it's time for buzzwords. I can get our slides to go. Here we go. So let me tell you, supply chain has a lot of them. And, for the record, we had them before it was cool to have them. And I'll highlight just a couple of them to start off with, none of which will be unfamiliar or new to you, I hope. So we're starting with what has to be one of the greatest buzzwords of all time, blockchain. I mean, simply beyond being jargon, this technology does truly offer some benefits to the supply chain. The blockchain technology, originating in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, has found a place in supply chain because it offers the benefits to so many stakeholders across the supply chain on what we already established was important in the supply chain, and that is information. The security aspects of this technology help build trust, and they help win that trust when established. And that eliminates a lot of the activities that were a part of the supply chain, really created to do just that, mitigate risk and build trust. So cutting out some of those activities and the actors themselves, like lawyers and bankers, this often really brings home significant cost savings. And companies that are investing in this technology, they see that reward, they see that ROI. So this illustration does a good job of describing blockchain is known as a distributed ledger technology. So here we highlight, again, the security, how things are distributed. And these factors really make it well supported, structured to support that growth, along with the technological advancement of the supply chain. One criticism, like any buzzword which is thrown at blockchain, is the disparity between how fast pundits say it will be adopted and how fast it's actually being adopted. That said, here's a look at some of the investment priorities for more than 1,300 companies for this technology. COVID and the pandemic's push towards online and electronic transactions will no doubt increase these investment priorities from what was a 2019 survey. If we look at more recent research, analysts expect the global blockchain market to reach a whopping $30 billion by 2027. The sectors of the supply chain where this growth is expected should be no surprise, with manufacturing and distribution leading the way. But the growth rates themselves are impressive. So that's blockchain, and I think that's one we can all keep in our lexicon ready to go. But up next is the Internet of Things. Another outstanding buzzword that really captures a whole host of connected devices. And this includes everything from your smart refrigerator to your fitness tracker to advanced mechatronics equipment on a modern factory floor. Enabled by sensors and cloud-based data analytics, IoT offers significant opportunity for nearly every sector of the supply chain. And there's a lot happening in the IoT space right here in North Carolina. So this is a great recruiting point, as a lot of these IoT technologies, they are here to stay. And I listed Riot and the Wireless Research Center here in North Carolina are two that are just outstanding resources in this area. So if you're unfamiliar with them, you've got resources and experts very close to home to help you make that, to articulate that competitive advantage. So if IoT is a network of interconnected physical objects, IoT is currently expanding, and it's evolving the scope of this complexity, the way in which devices are interlinked, the computations that can be processed by these objects autonomously, and the data that's stored in the cloud helps to evolve in an ever more complex way. Big data, BI, business intelligence, data collection, these are providing valuable information about customer behaviors, interests, and preferences. And this, taking it to the next level, has been called the Internet of Behavior. So we've got blockchain, the Internet of Things, and now the Internet of Behavior. And really, they're all interconnected in such a way that it just reinforces that ecosystem approach to the supply chain. Another popular buzzword that turns out to be really important in the development of supply chain is Industry 4.0, or the Industry 4.0 model of a digital supply chain. And so if you say 4.0, right, what happened to 1 through 3? You've got your industrial revolutions, to the introduction of mechanization, to the third industrial revolution and the introduction of computers and automation. Manufacturing has truly been at the forefront of innovation and invention. Today, we enter the fourth industrial revolution, and the integration of cyber and physical world in what we call Industry 4.0. That's also known as smart manufacturing. You may have heard it discussed, but it offers so many opportunities. This technical framework is largely focused on manufacturing, and it brings that connectivity and data with the processes that exist today. The outcome is often more effective, accurate, or sustainable processes for today's manufacturing environment. And when manufacturers are able to bring efficiency and sustainability to their manufacturing operations, they're able to grow, and that has that regional and local benefits. There's some other reasons that the digital supply chain offers some benefits. In business, time is money, and digitization makes data available faster and more precisely for decision making. It helps a company better serve customers and potentially improve their processes and products midstream. Late stage customization becomes a part of their value add that they can offer their customer or their downstream supply base. A digital supply chain operation effectively mitigates risk, and it makes the operation more efficient, and in the end, more profitable. So are these buzzword technologies being applied in the supply chain? Well, yes. Yes is definitely the answer. According to a 2021 report from Charlotte-based Material Handling Institute, 22% of companies surveyed indicate that the digital platform is already their predominant business model, and that 83% of them expect it to become the predominant model within the next 5 years. And you see some significant expectations for the next 5 years, which again, I think will continue to be accelerated by the world in which we live. So that's a few buzzwords for you to take home today. As you say, tongue in cheek, I like to say they're buzzwords, but there really is some meaning behind them. And here's what we'll look at next session. Just a little bit of a tease. We're going to get much further into the transportation and freight side of things. And hopefully some of these and some of them will hopefully be new surprises. So today we covered a good bit. In the upcoming sessions, I'll spend some time on those focus areas within supply chain management, from procurement, production, and distribution. We'll talk about that fine balance between inventory and working capital, which is changing large part towards the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit more about what the supply chain looks like out in the field as products get closer to the customer, closer to that end user. And then two of my favorite things, again, we'll go mode by mode, as I teased a little bit, and make sure you know your planes, trains, and automobiles. And then buzzwords too, I think helps bring it home. In our final session, we'll take it beyond manufacturing to discuss agriculture, energy, and finance. And we'll talk more about what resources we have here in North Carolina. We dipped our toe in the pool today with some of those that I showed you earlier, but there's outstanding resources for supply chain operators, for development, for innovation in the supply chain here in North Carolina. We'll talk e-commerce and figure out what other major shifts are shaping the future of the supply chain in North Carolina. And then, of course, we'll have our exam. So, that's up ahead. Hope everybody's been, taking notes. So I hope that wasn't too fast or too much. Let me see if I've got another question here. Ben's got a great point in the chat, and I'll read it right out loud. Although you mentioned port congestion, this is a significant supply chain challenge. Unlike our peer ports, North Carolina ports has zero terminal and port congestion, and this is a significant benefit for importers and exporters in North Carolina. I will retweet that all day, Ben. Equipment balance that you can find in North Carolina ports, the inland infrastructure here really makes it a great port to do business with. Efficiency. Any other questions? See if I'm missing any.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for that fascinating overview. We have time to take a few questions. So as a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A. We do have a few pre-submitted questions, so we'll go ahead and kick off with that while folks are thinking of other things to add. Talent shortages now impact nearly every North Carolina industry. Is the state producing enough logistics workers and supply chain managers to satisfy the demand by employers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I looked at I think it was Wall Street Journal said supply chain management degrees are like the hot new MBA, which I'm excited for. It makes my strange decision to do this many years ago. It's paying off now, I guess. I think you're seeing a lot of interest in the supply chain sector, mostly because now it's something we articulate as a part of our daily life. You know, I think you're going to see a wave of people interested in logistics, in manufacturing, in all of the peripheral industries that work around the supply chain. Based on our experience through COVID, I think that's going to be a thing. Shorter term, however, you still see, you know, robust interest, and you've got great programs through our community colleges that are working directly with companies, you know, very close manufacturers, that very hands-on approach. You take it to your universities, like NC State, like App State, like down at UNC Wilmington, Charlotte. There's several. I'm probably going to leave somebody out, so I apologize. But you know, there are outstanding supply chain programs all across the state, producing that next level skill set that's really going to be relevant to manufacturing into the supply chain. So I think we're in a good place for workforce. You know, you're going to hear a lot in transportation about driver shortages and some of the complications around maintaining labor with wage increases and the competitive labor market. All those things are good for the supply chain, I believe, because as you start to see supply chain wages increase, you'll see more interest in talent, and really it's the infrastructure that runs our economy.
So on that same note, if you were counseling a young person on job opportunities, what components of our supply chain offer the most lucrative career paths for today college graduates or recent high school graduates?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time with college students, and you know, when I find out they're studying business, I said, well, what part of supply chain do you study? And you know, when I was at NC State, we always said supply chain kids get jobs, and it's super accurate. You know, if you're going in and you're understanding what a business does to make money and how they do it, and you pair that with concentration in finance, or if you finished it, you can say finance. You know, that supply chain and finance combination is very powerful. You bring in those accounting and auditing skills that you're going to get in a business program, and that's again relevant. If you take it to the more sort of complex side and you get into industrial engineering and some of operations research, you know, that's bringing the sort of more industrial or sort of more engineering heavy side of things. And there's a lot of need for that, and really a lot of infrastructure to provide that kind of education. So lucrative, go into supply chain. You'll get a job, you'll get a high paying job, you bring in finance, you bring in a value add like another language, you know, and you open the door for international business. So that would be my advice. And that's usually my advice to kids when I talk to them.
Wonderful. That is great advice. Anyone on the line who is looking to change careers.
it's worth what they pay for it. So
that's very true. We do have a question now in the Q&A portal. So what kind of companies typically set up business near a port?
So we talked a lot about the ecosystem, right? And the port ecosystem is a really unique one. You have so many of the operational firms around a port. You have equipment repair, you have drayage, which is the trucks that move the chassis and containers back and forth. You have warehousing, cross-docking, where they take it from a marine container and put it in an over-the-road truck. You have intermodal facilities that are putting it from maritime, from ship to rail, from ship to truck to rail, and extending that reach inland. So those companies that serve the operational activity, that's a big part of things. Then you also have the other sides of things. You have the finance and the law that's required around these things. You have the customs brokerage and the compliance and government restrictions and regulations that you have to comply with. You have security, you have IT. So much of that is in has a very strong presence around a port. That's kind of those industries that I would say most regularly are going to be concentrated around a port. Manufacturers love to be near a port, or they need to be within a predictable and reasonable, transit to a port. Aaron might have a good answer to that too, and I'd welcome his input on that.
I'm sorry, Danny, I'm just trying to get off mute. No, I agree with everything that you've said as far as the port infrastructure. One of the things that COVID I think has taught us is not only the complexity of the supply chain, but mitigation of risk. And what we're seeing, in some of our conversations with port users are looking to diversify their strategies when it comes to import gateways and to have that flexibility to be near port, to not only, for example, transload into a domestic trailer, but also be closer to help with that equipment flow. Because as some of the congestion that we're seeing is due to the imbalance of equipment on the global trade side. So, as we come through this pandemic, I think a lot of those supply chain strategies will change to that near port model, or an inland port model where you can have your tier 1, tier 2 suppliers on the manufacturing side be closer to the OEMs.
Yeah, I think that just drives home how important things like rail access and a robust rail ecosystem, which North Carolina absolutely has with class 1s and short lines, how much that service is to expand that the port is not just this footprint, but it can go elsewhere. Again, with the highway network, I mean, that's really an accurate approach there.
Great. We do have a comment. Again, good news beyond the undergraduate major in SEM. UNCW has approved a Master of Science in SEM that is being sent to Raleigh for final approval. So again, we are moving to get more and more of our future workforce engaged in this economy. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and Dr. Rosen has a great program in Cameron School down in Wilmington. That's absolutely a highlight. So congrats on that development.
So thinking more broad, we talked just now about the businesses along the ports, thinking about businesses across the state. And I think you mentioned about 49% of companies are now converting to a smart factory model. How quickly do you think we're going to see the majority of manufacturers engaged in that smart factories structure?
I would say that the majority of manufacturers today are starting. They're integrating certain parts of it. We talk about levels of maturity, of digital maturity. They're making that journey. They're starting to make the investment in upgraded security for computer systems. They're taking things off of notebooks and putting them into, a digital platform. And it's as simple as that, that step. And then you can take it to the extreme where you have very much, automated factory floors, programming, lots of technology, ubiquitous technology. And very few manufacturers are at that level of, I'd say, sort of the most mature advanced manufacturing. But when they are, you're talking about major industry. You're talking about aerospace, automotive, heavy industry equipment, biotech, pharma. And we have all of those sectors, very robust presence in North Carolina. So you'll find people just starting their journey. I mentioned the MEP at NC State. The North Carolina MEP has a great program for digital manufacturing. There's tons of resources on how to start. But if you're not starting, again, that it's now's the time. Maybe is the advice, but most people are on that journey right now.
So in that same regard of moving more to that smart manufacturing, given COVID, hurricanes, cyber attacks, and any number of unknown challenges, how is North Carolina doing in managing risk to its supply chains?
I think we're doing well. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of tests lately, extreme weather events, the climate crisis continuing to push, the extremity of weather, and we've been responding. At DOT, I know that we've brought scenario analysis and resiliency into our priority when we talk about planning and infrastructure investment. I think Aaron and his team at the port would also say that resiliency and risk mitigation for them is a major part of their investment strategy. That is, that's just going to be the way of the future. If you're not thinking about resiliency and, diversifying if you're a manufacturer, you're diversifying your supply base. You may be bringing the majority of your parts from Asia, but you're going to find a closer supplier. You're going to find maybe a domestic supplier, and you may pay more, but you have them in that supply base. And you're going to see a lot more of those kinds of relationships being developed in the supply chain. So it's not just a company puts out an e-bid and 10 companies bid online and the lowest price gets it. That's not the world we're going to continue to live in. And business is slowly getting there.
Well, seeing no other questions, we'll go ahead and give folks a few moments back in their day. So thank you again, Dana, for your valuable guidance on this important topic. We appreciate NCEDA members clearing time on their busy calendars for today's webinar. Seems like there's an exciting road ahead for North Carolina's supply chain economy. And thanks to Dana, Aaron, and the North Carolina ports, we are all now better prepared to navigate it. Don't forget, this is the first of 3 webinars on supply chains presented by the North Carolina State Ports Authority. Watch your emails closely for information on upcoming offerings. And thanks again to our annual sponsors. We showed you the names earlier. These organizations and businesses offer year-round support of our professional development webinars like this one, and we're very grateful. Please watch your email for information on NCEDA's busy event calendar, such as our 2021 Fall Conference, for which the registration window is now open. We hope to see everyone there and at other live events and virtual gatherings on the horizon. In the meantime, please stay safe, and thank you everyone for attending today. Have a great day.